Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another in the series of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. My name is Rich Jordan, your resident host for the podcast, and joining me again as host is Mr. James Walker. Hello, James.
Yeah, hello everyone. Pleasure to be back.
Awesome, welcome back. And joining us today, we have a very special guest, Mr. Jim Hazen. So, Jim is a test automation architect who helps companies succeed in implementing automation in testing and performance tests. Jim has over 25 years of real world experience in vast, in depth knowledge of automation in testing across many different applications and technology platforms. Jim has presented at many conferences over the years, including Star West and Automation Guild, had many articles published on test automation and communication techniques for testers, and is the author of the book Before the Code, First Steps to Automation in Testing. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, James.
Yeah,
nice to be here.
You're most welcome. So to get started then, do you want to quickly give us a bit of background about yourself, kind of where your testing career started and how you got to where you are today? We might not get past this question.
Yeah. Yeah. I started off as a C and Fortran programmer many years ago and got into testing through a roommate who was working for a small software company and was doing a lot of development and testing work on the side. And then the company decided to start a formal testing group and brought myself and a couple other people on full time. So I left the other position and went to work for the software company because it was a lot more interesting and was an opportunity for me to grow my skill sets, things like that. And from there, I just kept stay with software testing. I went to a couple other companies and helped start their test groups. And then at one of them later on, I got into working with the first generation GUI test tools on OS 2 and Windows, and saw that as another niche that I could put myself into and combine my skills as a tester and a developer. And that's what I've been pretty much doing since. I've been in different types of positions as a lead, automation developer and architect, manager, practice lead for consulting companies, things like that. So quite a wide variety of experiences during my career.
I saw a photo of you on LinkedIn, maybe it was a couple of months ago, Jim, but it was of you, I think it was one of the first Load Runner conferences. I just thought that was amazing. Like that's such, like to be where we are today and to be through that whole evolution. Must have seen so many new technologies, so many process changes. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, over time I've worked with a lot of different commercial tools, and recently more with some of the open source stuff, JMeter and Selenium with Java, things like that. Last 3-4 years I've been more in management and helping companies with their processes and things like that. But yeah, like I said, I worked with a lot of different tools and saw how they were doing things, but also the technology changes from Windows desktop to client server over to early web, and then finally with the systems we have now with microservices and all of that fun stuff. Distributed, really distributed computing. So it's been interesting to see all this happen over the years. Some of it stayed the same and been renamed. Others have been radically new.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's interesting in terms of what you say there, in terms of things go in cycles, right? And from as someone who's been there from the early GUI based tools to where we are today, do you see a massive shift in the narrative or the mistakes that are being made, or is it more of the same stuff?
There's always been recycling of the classic mistakes and misconceptions of the work itself, both from software testing standpoint and specifically with automation, because you get a lot of new people that come in and don't know the history of it, or we've lost the experience and knowledge base to people shifting to other areas or just leaving the industry entirely. There's people like me that have just stuck with this career for a long time, and we're becoming fewer and fewer. I think. I mean, there's a new crop of people coming up that are going to learn these things, but myself and some other people, we try and make a point of helping them out so that they don't repeat our mistakes and fall into some of the potholes that we have over time. You know, it's
Yeah.
interesting at times when you go in and see a project and they ask you like, how can you help? It's like, okay, here's the things you need to start fixing. And you're like, well, why? And it's like, because these are classic problems that you've stumbled into. You know, here's how you can fix them, and let's move forward.
Yeah. You touched on a point there, and we have a conversation before this session, and we talk about what are some of the subjects you want to talk about, right? And one of the subjects you brought up was the kind of the employment situation within the testing industry today, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned there around people don't stay in the profession for long enough, and therefore there's a lot of repeat mistakes that are being made. And coupled with that, it's a hard kind of industry to get into or stay into at the moment, right? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, within the testing realm, that is definitely true, because a lot of people see it as a stepping stone to other areas. I always hear people talk about, well, I'm going to get into testing to get my foot in the door, but I really want to be a developer, or I want to go into product management or sales engineering, things like that. So it's seen as a stepping stone and not a long-term career.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's people like myself and a few others who have seen this as a long-term career. I mean, like I said, when I started out, I was a programmer. I saw the niche area of software testing because when I started out, a lot of people weren't really doing it. It wasn't that well known. I actually had people at times ask me like, well, what do you do for work? I go, well, I work in the software industry. I do software testing. They look at me like, what? Aren't you a programmer? I go, well, yeah, but I apply my programming development skills in a different way. And with automation, the same thing. I was lucky enough to be in early and riding that wave. So I saw another niche area, and as I said, I combined the two and said, look, this is something I can really specialize in and potentially have a career out of it. Not that I don't mind programming, things like that. I like it, but I've always found myself being better at pulling the problem apart or looking at a system and pulling it apart and understanding how it really should work or why it doesn't work that way. So again, I'm trying to play to my strengths.
Yeah. Why do you think it's the case that almost testing is seen as a kind of a stepping stone? Is it kind of almost a lack of education in terms of the realm of testing? When you go to universities and things, a lot of it is about development and development only.
There. It actually starts there because when I was in college, my degree is in biological sciences, but I took a lot of computer programming classes because I saw that as an up-and-coming area that I need to become educated on so I could apply it to the work I was interested in. And like I said, when I got out of college and got my first job, I was kind of mixing the two. I was actually working at a hospital as a programmer on an imaging system for nuclear medicine. So like when somebody goes in and gets a scan done, I was working on that software. And ended up moving over to the PC software side because, like I said, my roommate had, some work for that I could do on the side, make some extra money. Next thing I know, they're offering me a full-time job, and it's like, okay, sure. And I just took off from there. But it definitely starts at the college university level because the emphasis is upon designing, building the software, and moving on. All the technical stuff, the data structures, the databases, things like that. And when they talk about testing, they just talk about debugging your code. So you're doing more code level unit style testing, debugging, looking at it and saying, okay, do I have this logic structure correct? Am I accounting for some of the error conditions I need to? And you don't really integrate to a full system. I mean, the programs are when I went through, the programs were very straightforward, process oriented. I mean, this is before object oriented programming came on. It's we were using what was called structured programming techniques. So it didn't lend itself to that. But at the master's levels and PhD, some universities are definitely focusing on that. My alma mater, a number of years after I got out of college, they started a master's program in software testing. Now it's more theoretical and things like that.
That's interesting.
But when I look at it, I go, okay, there's some good foundational stuff here. I mean, these guys come out, they're going to be a little more theoretical and advanced in what the real world's doing because, as we all know, university college is different from the real world. I mean, you get your foundations, things like that. You apply it to work, but then there's so much more you learn on the job in the working world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I started out, there
Absolutely.
were some people that were writing books and doing conferences and training classes. But in comparison to today, I mean, it was very small scale. Nowadays, there's so much
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah. I almost feel there's a. Sorry, go ahead, Rich. You go.
I was gonna say kind of the way you kind of explained almost the simplistic way that testing is talked about through education. Do you think that then bleeds into things like almost the way that modern development practices are sold? They almost talk about very simple systems, and therefore almost the complexity of building and improving real systems often gets neglected.
Yeah, it's
I don't know
there's
if
a base understanding that needs to be there. And,
yeah.
yeah, there needs to be a base understanding, and then as you work with things, you get more and more involved with it and get deeper knowledge and experience with it. I remember the first generation tools, they would demo the tool using Notepad, which, and really wasn't good. And it was they were emphasizing record playback, which had come over from the early DOS desktop applications and mainframe with a green screen. So the logic was very linear, and the interaction with the screen was very linear and straightforward. I mean, screen scraping, things like that. When you shifted over to a GUI, it was a complete shift in mindset because it's driven. So you can get to anywhere from anywhere, and because the UI is graphical, it's a bitmapped screen that we see on Windows and things like that. The early, tools, if you try and record playback, well, you could record it and play it back a couple times, it might work, and then for some reason it breaks because something is moved. It could be that you're on a different screen size, the color palette, or screen resolution, things like that. So those are always breaking things, and people had to start looking at it from a programmatic standpoint. And fortunately, the tool that I started off with did have programming capabilities in it. And when I was talking to the vendor and their SEs, their systems engineers, they're like, yeah, that's how we test a lot of our stuff. So I just automatically shifted my methodology, because I admit I bought into the early record playback because that's what I did when I was working with DOS apps. I was using keyboard macro programs to drive the tests, and they weren't as sophisticated. So now I had to learn how to program in a windowed environment. And then when web came around, okay, it's inside of a browser, so the thing still looks kind of the same, but how it's constructed in the background is different. So you had to learn that and learn how to program to those things. And now with different changes in web-based, browser-based applications, I mean, you guys have heard of shadow DOMs and iframes and things like that. Again, that was another shift that we had to learn how to work around, because you couldn't get down to the lower layers of the UI and pick it apart properly and control it. And then today, everybody uses XPath, I mean, predominantly XPath to find how to locate an object on the screen. Well, those can be unreliable and become flaky. I always see these things about flaky tests. And the first question I ask is, how are you finding that thing? And I always get XPath or CSS. And it's like, why don't you use the name or ID property? Well, there's nothing there for us to work with. It's like, talk to your developers and get them to put unique and static values in there. And some people have actually gone as far as telling development to put in a unique property called test ID or something like that, so they have control of it. Because, I mean, tools like Selenium, it's got built-in functionality. The find by function itself, it's very powerful. It'll recursively go find that object for you anywhere on the screen, as long as it has a good, solid, unique value to go find. It's a little bit slower. I don't consider it that slow versus XPath, things like that. But when you build in those testability features, things become a lot more reliable. And that's the key automation is, reliability, being able to work with the application and drive it, but also the maintainability of that code base.
So in terms of the kind of the evolution, I guess I want to get back to the kind of the skills of the tester
Hmm.
and kind of the fact that testers don't stay in the industry long enough. You've got the agile way of working that big question there. Do we even need testers? Question mark. Um, you know, large swathes of test ads, job ads, just talk about test skills being you need to know Selenium, you need to
Yeah.
know Java, you need to know XYZ in terms of coding skills.
Well, and that's
Why do you think that's the case, and what problems does that introduce?
and that's a misunderstanding of businesses not understanding the difference between a business tester and a technical tester. I'm a
Yeah,
technical tester. I work with
yeah,
technology. I mean, early on in my career, I worked with a lot of bleeding edge technology with hardware and hardware software interaction, things like that. So I had to go that direction. I mean, the business, I worked with the business people and the BAs, understand that better, so I can write the tests. But I'm more technically inclined, so it's understanding what the need is. I mean, yeah, we need the business people. They're going to understand
yeah,
how the application should really work. They understand the data better than anybody else. But when it comes to understanding the techniques and processes and methodologies of testing, that's more technical. When it comes to implementing automation, that's more technical. And performance testing, things like that, API testing, because you have to have an ability to understand writing code, logic behind it, and then debugging. I mean, yeah, I'm not innocent. I have to debug my stuff a lot. I'm not perfect. So it's getting that understood, and there's been a big shift to the technical aspect because companies think, oh, we're just going to automate everything. We only need people with
yeah,
programming skills and things like that. And then they lose the other half of the equation, which is that testing mentality and knowledge base, because you have to, I mean, yeah, look at it this way. I mean, in other industries, there are people that specialize in testing, hardware manufacturing. There are people that are test engineers that do destructive tests. Manufacturing,
yeah,
like automotive and things like that, some of the best engineers are in their test groups that do the destructive tests
yeah,
because they have to have that understanding of how things are built in order to understand how to create tests to prove that it's working correctly or prove that it doesn't work correctly under certain conditions. So,
yeah,
you know, like I said, I lean more to the technical. I understand the business, things like that, and how to pick it apart. I mean, could I write requirements, things like that? Yeah, from a base standpoint, but do I know how to pick them apart? Yeah, I do. I know how to take a
yeah,
requirement or a user story and pick it apart, and those are some of the skills that need to be maintained and are being lost to a degree because there's such a heavy shift that, oh, we'll just hire a bunch of SDETs and they'll automate everything
yeah,
and our testing will be perfect. And it's like, that's not true. I mean, as we know,
yeah,
working with and implementing any type of automation tool and process, it's
Hmm.
just a tool for us to use to do our work. It helps us become more efficient. Um,
yeah,
and
There is almost a kind of syndrome here, right? Of everyone just going towards the bright, shiny object, which is
yeah,
automation or AI at the moment, right? And I think almost what you're describing there, Jim, it's critical thinking, right? You're coming in, you're tearing it apart, you're thinking about a process, a system, a requirement deeply, and you're leveraging your skill set to go in and start to interrogate it, ask questions. Should it work this way? Does it work the way the requirement said it should have worked, etc.? Right? And to me, that's always been the key skill of the tester, right? It's not executing a bunch of manual tests at the end. It's the critical thinking, not just in the testing phase, throughout the whole software development lifecycle, right? Starting at the
yeah,
requirements, through the engineering, it's everywhere. And I think there's a big misconception there in the industry, or at least in kind of primitive organizations, right?
yeah. And it's somewhat of a self-inflicted wound because, like I said, people get into testing thinking all it uses is a stepping stone, and they may not have the proper knowledge and training coming into it, and they're doing things on the fly, and a lot of on the OJT, on job training and things like that. The companies are not providing the training because it's just like, oh well, these people are cheap, we're not going to put the money into them because they're not going to stick around. And I've seen that all the time. And there's a lot of people in software tech that do not have computer science or CIS degrees. I mean, there's people with psychology degrees, or people like me with the biological sciences. And that can be true in development, because actually one of the best developers I've ever worked with, the guy has a master's in music composition. And
Oh, wow.
as he said, he goes, yeah, I write my
Okay.
software like I write music. And when he said that to me, I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, okay, yeah, actually, that kind of makes sense. And he was an interesting guy. He was a Mac programmer, but yeah, really good. But there's a lot of different background. And again, that stems from some of the lack of training within the universities and colleges. But the businesses and the business people are also changing a lot too. I mean, software industry, we just experience churn all the time. I mean, you see people from companies, different positions, things like that. And it's good from the standpoint that we don't become stale, but it also has its negative, because yeah, people may not be around long enough to really get a good understanding and really be able to apply it properly. And that's from both management, business side, and the technical side. That's my experience.
No, I fully agree with you, Jim. I mean, also from my perspective, it's a really hard job, right? Like everyone is trying to deliver more, everyone's trying to deliver faster, and it's an unfortunate reality that the testing team take the hardest brunt of that, right? Engineers have had, I mean, there's a crunch there, but also if you look at the tools that are available to engineers, the libraries that are out there, developers can move extremely fast at coding solutions, right? And I think there's almost every level here, like education, absolutely. Like, I don't think testing has seen the same level from the university level through everything else around it, right? Like engineering, there's so much stuff out there, but also from a tooling level and tooling perspective, there's so much more accelerators that increase productivity for engineers. And then that just puts a squeeze on the testing team, right? And I'm almost amazed you don't see more testers who are burnt out, just because there's so much stuff they have to do and the time is squeezed, and it's a nightmare, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, I mean, burnout is a big factor. I have admittedly burned out a few times myself, especially early in my career. I mean, you're working long hours. Yeah. It's intense to get things done. With the first generation tools, even the second generation tools, they were anywhere from 6 months to a year behind the technology changes. A couple of the vendors got in tight with Microsoft, so they were able to bring out the capabilities within a shorter period of time, but others were not. But again, yeah, the education of that wasn't there. So, it's like, developers, here's how you can use this form designer to do these things quicker, or, here's this library, so if you call it these particular functions and methods, we'll do this for you. The true wasn't same for testing and the test tools. I mean, it's gotten better with some of the open source, and some of the people out there working on things are trying to bring it out sooner. As soon as they see it, they're trying to put something out. So it's become better over time. And in order to continue to get better. Now, how does AI affect that? AI could, I know, I knew we were going to eventually get into this. AI has a capability to pull from a large data knowledge set. So if you know how to write your prompts correctly and focus them properly, yeah, you can get some good results out of it. If you don't know how to do it, you're just kind of like throwing something on the wall to see if it sticks. You're gonna get into the gigo effect, garbage in, garbage out. So for testers, we have to understand how to really leverage and apply that AI to our work. So we have to make sure we understand how to write the prompts and put in specific information so that we can get specific things back. As an example, on the project I'm working on right now, in one of the user stories, they put in the rough logic of how this business piece should work. So, if this condition, this data, whatever it is, then this, else this, and I took that, I put it into ChatGPT and said, write me basic test cases that cover these different scenarios. And it spit out like 8 to 9 test cases per thing. And I still have to go through them and check to see if they're really valid. But the time to do that by hand myself versus letting the tool take it and give something back, I mean, it cut my time down by easily a third to a quarter of the time it would have taken to write it out, go through the logic myself. Yeah. And so by understanding how to write the prompt correctly and having it in that structure, I get it back, then I can just spend my time looking and saying, yeah, is this really valid or not? Is this covering some of the things or not? Oh, okay, this gives me an idea about another condition I should cover because I didn't think of that at first. So those are some of the skill sets that test people are going to have to learn with that. I mean, it's not going to be a silver bullet. Yeah. And this is the same thing that happened with the early automation tools, is they were seen as silver bullets. We'll just automate everything 100%, and all of our testing will be great and all that stuff. And it's like, no, you still have to have the human brain behind the keyboard, behind the fingers on the keyboard, to put that stuff in and build it right. And I've always been an advocate of using a programming approach to automation because the machine is only as smart as what you tell it to do. Yeah. And your code is only as smart as you are. And there's other people out there that are a lot smarter than me. So I look at what they've done and say, yeah, I can use that. And I've had some other people go, well, yeah, I like how you did that. I'm going to borrow that. It's like, go ahead. If you think it's useful to you, use it. And I've seen some of your things. I'm going to use those too. So there's a lot more collaboration nowadays between people because of discussion groups and the open source projects, things like that. So
I'm waiting for you to say your quote, Jim. It's oh,
you've been waiting for
automation. It's not.
Yeah.
Rather than saying it.
That's going to be the soundbite of the podcast, right?
Yeah. Well, because of my experiences, and one in particular, because that first tool I worked with, admittedly, I didn't coin the phrase. It was the salesperson of the tool that I was working with. We were in a meeting with myself, my manager, the salesperson for the vendor, and then one of their SEs. And my manager kept asking, well, why can't we just record playback? We used to do this with this other tool on the DOS and terminal emulator. And after a few rounds of back and forth on like that, and the salesperson trying to explain it, the salesperson goes, well, what do you want? It's automation, not auto magic. And I had to sit there and put my hand over my mouth because I was about ready to bust out laughing. And the SC across from me, who I'd worked with quite a bit, he looks at me and just kind of rolls his eyes and like going, and it stuck. It stuck.
Yeah, it's good.
And that's when, really the point was driven home about having to do programmatic style approaches to implementing automation.
Yeah.
And, over the years, I've always I've explained that to management, saying, hey, look, this isn't just, throw the tool in the machine, have somebody sit there and go do a bunch of stuff in your testings, magically built. It's like, it's going to take these steps and it's going to take time to build this. But once we get things built up and get a good base built, we could build off of that and really start to accelerate with what we're doing. And that's what I was able to do.
Yeah.
And one project, I went and they already had something implemented and they were doing things programmatically, but they weren't structuring how they were really running the tests correctly. And some of the tests were redundant, so I eliminated them or combined them and things like that. And also, too, they were only running the automation scripts on a couple of machines. And I said, look, we got one tool that can run this stuff across multiple machines in parallel. So let's set it up so it runs distributed. So we went from 2 to like 10 or 12 of them. And got distributed. So we were able to compress the time and get an efficiency gain of about 8x. So it was running 8 times faster.
Yeah.
And we demoed it to the director of development, and they just stood there with their jaw hanging, like, I can't believe you did this. And it's like, it was just, realigning some things and understanding, we could do this stuff in parallel. And that's what people are doing nowadays.
Yeah.
So you get that economy of scale. The amount of time it takes to test is still the same, but because you're dividing and conquering and running things in parallel, you get a perceived compression of time. And that's where, some of the auto magic comes into play, because people are like, wow, this is really running fast. It's like, well, it's because I've got it running across 20 different machines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
I've gone in and made the wait states a lot better and things like that. So again, it's technical thinking that has come into play.
I think it's interesting because, like you say, right? It's the automation is just the tool that you use, right? You use your brain power to then do the right things with the tool, and we seem to have this blind faith that automation is the tool, is the solution to all testing problems, right? And we joke about how many times you quote that. Jim is an excellent commenter on LinkedIn. If you're not following Jim, please go and follow him. But the amount of times I've seen you quote that on LinkedIn to people who have put their blind faith into it is crazy, right? I guess in terms of if AI is the new, unfortunately, AI and magic doesn't really rhyme the same as automagic does. But if brain power was the thing behind automation, right? We've got this kind of this churn in testing, right? And therefore you've got the skill sets that aren't sticking around to understand the mistakes, but you've also got this big knowledge drain, right? Of testers who have also accumulated a lot of systems knowledge in their heads, right? We've got a big problem, I think, around lots of static documentation, lots of static specifications, things drawn on whiteboards that are a couple of years old. You mentioned there AI. The importance of AI is to have a lot of good data. How is that data ever going to get there?
And that's where people go in and work with the large language models and train it. It's that transfer of the information from your brain into the model. And like with your guys' software model-based testing, you're working with clients and saying, here's a way to capture the information, design what the behavior of the system is, and then from that, being able to generate test scenarios, the test cases, the test data. I mean, data is a big thing in testing. I mean, you can design a great test, but if you don't have the data behind it to really drive it and work it, then it's not that useful. So with AI, you could say, hey, test that will follow these these input parameters and these ranges of values and things like that. And as a part of it, you can say, give me the minimal set of tests to cover this, and it'll go generate it, because some of the tools have been designed and trained on how to do minimal sets for testing for proper coverage and things like that. I mean, I don't want to go off into that. That's a whole different thing, but you guys are the experts with that, with your processes and tools like that. So somebody like me can take these things, and again, it's a tool that I use to help me become more efficient, more effective in my work. Because like I said, a couple of times with the ChatGPT, it came out with test cases like, oh, I hadn't thought about that one, or oh, this gives me an idea of something else I did not think of. So it's all benefit. It's just how you use it. I mean, the adage of, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail when you use it. You have to understand your tools and how to apply them. I mean, at times, you use a hammer. Other times, you're going to use an impact wrench, or instead of a pair of pliers, you're going to use a crescent wrench to fit that bolt and things like that. Just understanding how to use your tools properly. And that's where some people argue about the technical versus artisan, or what am I thinking of? The art of testing. I mean, you kind of know what I'm talking about. in that respect. I know those guys, and it's fun when we have conversations. But yeah, I mean, we at times kind of like, and I know people argue this and say that's not a correct analogy, but we kind of have to become alchemists at time, combine the art with the science, and those are things that some people have and others don't. It comes in at times to the profession, and other times it leaves, and that's where for someone like me who's been at this for a long time, and and talking about the other subject was as people progress in their careers and things like that over time, we may not be up to date on all the latest technology, but we have a lot of experience that can be tapped into. And companies now, to some degree, are there's the ageism problem. It's just not within testing; it's within the whole industry. And I have to admit, early in my career, I was one of those young guys who was rip roaring to go, and some of the older guys were like, just calm down, and this will work itself out. And now I'm in that position, looking back and going, wow, I was kind of obnoxious back then. And as opposed now, I've mellowed a little bit, but the companies are so focused on, as you said, all the latest shiny tools, all the latest things. And there's people out there like myself that have deep experience that could come in and say, hey, look, this is a known problem. Here's how we get around it. Instead of the new people coming in and saying, well, I've never seen this before, I don't know what to do. And management just going, well, you need to figure it out. So there needs to be a mix of the people with the experience and the newer people that have the technology, so that we can both learn, but also be able to work together to come up with a better solution. Like I said, on one project years ago, I came in and reworked some of their automation. I didn't really create anything new. I reworked it so it became more efficient because of my knowledge of how to do distributed parallel test execution. You're going to say something, James. I'm sorry.
I agree with you, Jim. No, I fully agree with you, Jim. I was nodding away. But I think there is an element here where, and you're absolutely right, you have to walk before you can run, right? And I think if you look at someone who doesn't have a lot of experience and they're trying to use AI and they're trying to leverage that for testing or for any other discipline, right? If you don't have that foundational knowledge, that's quite a scary concept, right? Because you have no idea if the results that have been produced are correct. You have no ability to appreciate what's been done. And, all of a sudden you're going to have this leakage of stuff that's been produced in the testing domain. It could be test cases that actually do not provide a significant level of coverage and actually provide very little confidence for making sure that that piece of software meets the initial requirements and it works properly, right? So I think, if there is anyone out there who is kind of in that phase early on in their career, it's worth taking a step back and just spending some time going through the fundamentals and just learning that before you jump head in and leap towards that bright shiny object of either automation, AI, or anything else from it, right? It's the same story, different technology, and it's quite scary if you don't go down that route, I think, right?
Yeah, because going back to the beginnings of my career in this industry, when I shifted fully over to testing, I knew I didn't know enough to do the job. So I started looking for information in books or magazine articles, even seminar classes and things like that. And I was fortunate at that time. I was living in the Los Angeles area, and there was a technical bookstore, and I went up there one weekend and just went into the software development section and specifically was looking for testing books. And I found only like 4 or 5 books on software testing. A couple of them were very dry and very process oriented. I mean, one of them was written by a guy who was a CPA, but he also, was talking specifically about testing. I mean, it was a dry read. It was tough. And then there was another book that I found that was on software metrics, and it talked about how to measure testing and determine if things are ready to go. So bought those books and read through them, and a couple other books on software architecture practices and things like that. And yeah, at times, I mean, I'm reading the book, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what? and I get back into it. I have to I have to reread. Trust me, I had some college classes like that too, in the texts. But I pushed myself, and then the company I was working for, I heard about a couple of classes on software testing, which was one was a week class of formal software testing techniques. So I pushed my company and say, hey, look, you guys got to send me to this. It's going to be worth the money. And then the following week, there was another class on automation. And I said, put me into that too, because we can use this. And those two gave me a good foundation to start from. And I mean, they weren't perfect at that time. It was, more about the testing of, like I said, the mainframe systems, the early desktop, things like that. But I had that foundation. So when I went over and started working with GUI and things like that, and also client server, I had that base understanding. And I didn't get that in college. In college, I could debug my code left and right. I was known within my class for, if you can't figure something out debugging it, ask Jim, because he'll probably have an idea. And I actually had a professor say that in class. It's like, yeah, guys, if you get stuck and whatnot, go ask Jim if you can't talk to one of the TAs in the lab, because he'll have kind of a good idea.
Yeah.
And I jokingly said, yeah, it's because my code isn't perfect. Trust me, I always make mistakes, so I'm trying to figure out how to get it to work right. And like I said, that's been like my innate skill, but I've built off of it. So for people in the industry that want to get in, there is fundamental knowledge that needs to be learned and learn how to apply it, and then from there you can expand. It's like learning any programming language. The constructs of logic and data types, things like that, are kind of universal, but how it's implemented is different in the language. So you learn the syntax and the nuances and things like that. Once you do that, you can go to multiple languages. At one point I was programming C, Fortran, VB, things like that. Now with Java, I look at Java and I look at it, it's like, well, that's basically like C# and C++, because I've done some work with those. So you get those root base understandings. And that's the thing with testing, is we need to do that a lot more. And there's groups out there that are trying to help provide that training. It's a lot better than it was way back when I started. Nowadays, it's kind of like an overload of information. It's like, I've got all this stuff to pick through. Which one do I start with? And speaking for myself, having to get a better understanding of AI is like, where do I start? There's so much out there. What is that intro class that I need to find? What's the next class that expands on that? And then what are the other classes that have specializations within it or things like that? So you have to have an inquisitive mind and be kind of an investigator to go dig through all that. And that itself lends itself to a testing mindset, is looking at it, understanding how it works, and then picking it apart, and then learning about those particular pieces you're interested in. So that's kind of my story. But yeah, it's like I said, nowadays my concern, because I'm getting towards the backside of my career, is how do I fit in? And talking to some people recently, and a couple other things I've just read, is the way I can sell myself is say, hey, look, I've got all this experience. It really is valuable. It can be applied. If not directly, then indirectly, because I have that knowledge base to pull from it and be able to extrapolate and apply it. So that's my advantage and my benefit to a potential company, or in consulting situations to the client. I know how to go find things, or find people that know that.
Yeah. Do you think that not necessarily testers, but the people who manage testers, the people who lead delivery, they understand the challenges that are either within testing or inherited within testing?
Some do, especially if they come up through the ranks. The other ones that are kind of brought in from other areas do not. And that's where the people that are knowledgeable in testing like that need to be patient and start trying to explain things to them and get them to buy into it. And some people are receptive. Others are just like, well, no, this is the way we've always done it. Or, look, I'm the manager here. Who are you? And it's just like, I'm the guy that's got 3 times the experience of you, but I don't want to be in management because I don't want those headaches, but I'm trying to help you out. And that a part of that is the churn. And then, as you mentioned with Agile, Agile, is this thing of minimalistic processes and people in the equation and like that. And some people were saying that the early Agile manifesto was like, oh, we don't need testers. Well, in fact, part of it was like the testing shifts to the people on the team. It's not just one specific person. Everybody has to think about, we're going to test and prove this thing out. So now developers and business people need to think about, how are we going to make sure this thing is working correctly? Or if it doesn't work correctly, it doesn't, blow up in somebody's face and cause the business to lose time and money. I mean that our business is risk management, risk detection.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly. Yeah.
Like I said, it's kind of that detective mindset of like, okay, what happened here? And trying to figure that out, and then being able to relay that to the people that make decisions. I mean, I see off and on things of people saying, well, testing is QA, and QA is responsible for all the quality of the product. And it's just like, no, this goes across the board, guys. I mean, some of the other people in the industry that I know that are very adamant about the artistic side of this profession is, we are information gatherers, we are detectives, we present the information to the people so they can make informed decisions. And I buy into that heavily, because it's like, you're employing me to tell you if this thing is sound enough, and based on that, you can make a business decision whether this is going to go out the door or not. And a couple of companies where the management adopted that philosophy and bought into it, that's exactly what we did. I mean, we had one release at one place I was at. We laid out all the risks, and we had some severe bugs, but we said, what's the exposure to our user base? And they said, well, it's maybe 2 to 5% of our users. And the CTO goes, I can live with that. Let's line up a maintenance release to come out shortly after this, but we need to get this thing out the door. Everything else is in good shape, right? And we said, yes. He goes, fine, I'll sign off on it. I'll take responsibility for it. And my jaw dropped. I'm like, excuse me, what did you say? You'll take the responsibility, like, you're not going to beat me up for that? And he's like, no. He goes, you've given me the information I need in order to make a decision for this business. And that's my job. And I was like, I like this guy. So I'd only been there for about a year and a half, and had minimal interaction with the guy. But it was a big go, no-go decision meeting on a major release. So, it comes back to basic knowledge and experience. I mean, like I said, when I was a young guy, I was the hot shot. One place I was at, we had what we call the situation of the PC people versus the mainframe people. I was one of the PC guys. I was the new technology. The mainframe guys are like, yeah, we've heard this before. And now that I'm on the flip side of things, I look back and go, okay, yeah, I understand what was going on. And that's just experience.
Yeah.
So
it's gone full circle, isn't it? The mainframe guys are now saying we used to do agile back in the early 80s. And
well, yeah, I mean, they were doing some things on the fly and prototyping, and sometimes those prototypes became business applications. And I mean, one of the first commercial software that I worked on was a couple of professors who'd come up with this model for predicting sales for grocery stores. I mean, it was, you go through the checkout line and scan data and how things are placed on the shelves and things like that. They built software to model all that, and they were using it as part of their classes, and they said, oh, well, hey, this may be a product. So they took that prototype and created a product out of it. And over time, we evolved it and things like that. So yeah, that happens. I mean, some things happen by accident too. Person creates a piece of software and doesn't think about it. Somebody else sees it and goes, that's a great idea. Person else in the light goes in there, he's like, oh, wait a minute, I can start a business off of this. And they have. I've worked for a couple of them like that. And you hear their origin stories. You're like, why didn't I think of that? Or they took the risks to do that, and kind of sucking up here a little bit, James. I mean, that's where you and your group with you guys saw something there. You decided to take on that risk and produce a product that will do this. Same thing early on with the early defect tracking tools. When I saw one of the first commercial tools come out, I was like, why a couple other guys were doing something like that 3 years ago? Oh, we're idiots. We blew it.
I think it's similar with Jira. Similar with Jira as well, right? In that, it's just another ticket tracking tool.
Absolutely.
But I mean that's
There's
kind
so
of
many now, right? Monday.com.
Yeah, and that's kind of my history within this industry, because like I said, I started out years ago when things were starting to come up, especially in the PC personal computer area, and I've seen it grow and things like that. So there's a lot of different factors, but
just very quick.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I'm conscious we're just coming up to time. I really want to get your thoughts in terms of, we talked about a lot of challenges, the churn in the industry, a lot of drain of expertise. What would you like to see change? You can't say lack of churn because that's too easy. Give me a bit more of an elaborate answer in terms of what would you like to see change in the next few years in terms of test industry? That's a difficult one.
Yeah, it is. I would say, I guess, in general for software testing, is a change of mindset by management that tools are not going to replace people.
Yeah.
You need people to utilize those tools and get the work done. I mean, it's like other industries that have automated, is that sure, you may reduce some of the numbers of people, but you still need people with the intelligence and knowledge to run and maintain that automation. I mean, even with AI, people say like, "Oh, we'll just replace people outright," and it's like, no, you can't replace the human brain. And I jokingly say, if AI ever becomes smart enough and aware enough that it can independently think better than we can, at that point, run for the hills, because it's going to realize,
probably not going to want to do our testing.
Humans are not a good thing.
Yeah.
Or it'll decide it'll become a benevolent dictator over us. So either you have the Terminator and Skynet, or you have Wall-E and the autopilot on the Axiom.
Oh my God.
Sorry, that's just my warped view and sense of humor on that.
Brilliant.
I'm hoping people get a better understanding. Like I said, I hope people get a better understanding, but also too, as far as the profession, this is a profession that you can be in for a long time and have a good career. And
100%.
Absolutely.
If people understand that and really work towards it, they can be successful.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We're coming up to the hour. I'm conscious you've got a hard stop in 3 minutes' time, Jim. So a big thank you for your time.
Sure, thank
you guys. People want to
reach
out to you. How best should they reach out?
LinkedIn. Yeah.
Put a rubbish comment about automation on LinkedIn, and you'll reply, right?
Yeah, as I've said to some people, I kind of do drive-by postings. People are like, "Why don't you write more articles? Why don't you do things like that?" It's like, no, I think I'll just do a pithy drive-by comment.
Well, the comments are awesome. Follow Jim, as I say, on LinkedIn. It's
thanks, guys.
It's an education in itself in terms of good advice.
100%.
But as I say, Jim, thank you for the last hour. Thank you for all the wisdom that you've imparted on us. As I say, Jim's got a lot to offer in terms of you're stuck for ideas around not just automation but how to test. He's got a book, as I mentioned earlier on, Before the Code: First Steps in Automation and Testing. So if you're interested, go and check that out. Big thank you again to Jim for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Jim.
There we go.
You guys.
I'm sure we can put something in the comments as well.
Great.
Brilliant.
And for everybody out there,
thanks very much then.
No, I was going to say for people out there, There are a lot of other people out there that have deep experience. Tap into them. I mean,
Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
willing to share our information.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks very much then, Jim. Thanks everybody else for listening to the pod today. If you're interested, please like and subscribe and follow the future pods that we're doing. Thanks a lot then. Goodbye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Goodbye.